Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Expanse Season 5. In this video I give my review of Season 5 of the Expanse as a whole. So I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for all of Season 5. If you haven't seen up to the very end of Season 5 of the Expanse, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So this was an amazing season. In my opinion, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I've actually been really surprised of how many opinions I've heard of that complaints people had of this season, and a common opinion that I heard, which I personally completely and utterly disagree with, is that Season 5 was not as good as the first 3 seasons of The Expanse. Now, I personally believe that Season 5 was actually much better than Season 1 and 3 of The Expanse. Season 1 I still would hold up as my least favorite season of The Expanse, even though it's still good. It's still great. Don't get me wrong, there's no such thing as a bad season of The Expanse. But it's obvious to me that the showrunners have had yet to find their footing at this stage, that they were still learning how to adapt the books, and they were still learning how to, and they fumbled a bit more. I think the pacing was off, and you can just kind of tell that it wasn't all there. In fact, there's a lot of people who I recommend to watch The Expanse, and they can't get through Season 1. They watch the first couple episodes of Season 1 and give up. And I tell them, look, you gotta plow through Season 1. It gets better. And then those who have are like, oh my god, after they watch Season 2, they're like, you're right, this show's amazing. So I'm just simply amazed at those who would say that Season 1 is better than Season 5, because I think objectively, clearly, that's not the case. And as far as Season 3 goes, I love Season 3. There's a lot I like about Season 3, but it had major pacing issues. It felt like two halves, and the second half where they adapted Book 3, I was very disappointed with. There's some things they got really right, and trust and believe me, there's some things about that, even that second half of Season 3, that I love. But if I look at it as a whole, the pacing was off. It was way too rushed. They didn't do the storylines from the books justice. And because Book 3, that Abaddon's Gate, is my favorite book. It remains my favorite book, and I really think that the show shortchanged it, personally. So that's why I would say Season 5 is better than Season 3. Now, Season 4, most people, almost everyone I've seen agrees that Season 5 is better than Season 4. Almost everyone that I've seen agrees that. And I agree with that as well. I think this is definitely a step up in improvement. And honestly, I think that has a lot to do with the source material, because Book 4 was, in my opinion, the weakest book. And so that translated when they tried to adapt it into the season. In fact, I think what they did in the show, Season 4, was way better than Book 4. So I think they really improved it, but still they were working with weak source material. So that leaves Season 2, and to be honest, I'm kind of torn between Season 5 and Season 2. I will say definitively that both of those seasons are my 2 favorite seasons of The Expanse. I think these 2 seasons represent The Expanse at its best. But if I had someone put my feet to the fire and they forced me to, and I had to choose between them, I would definitely go with Season 5, I will say, because, and I have watched Season 2 fairly recently, like within the last year. I watched all 5 seasons of The Expanse fairly recently, and I did notice Season 2 did have a lot of sort of slow filler episodes. I don't know if filler's the right word, but slow episodes that particularly mid-season, like after that break, and the episode Home, which dealt with Julie Mal and the what's called arrows colliding towards Earth, that remains my favorite episode of the show. That by far is the singular best episode of the show. But after that episode, you got a bit of a lull in season 2. It took it like 4 or 5 episodes to recover, to really get interesting again. Whereas season 5, I thought there were no filler episodes, that it remained constant. I'm sorry, but there was a filler episode in season 2. That was the episode with the Epstein Drive guy, and he was like, "Oh, this is how I created the Epstein Drive." Like, that was the most useless one. There was one in season 1 that dealt with like these rock hoppers, which was also useless. But so maybe that was more useless in this one. But that's one of the most useless filler-esque episodes of the entire show. Whereas season 5, I don't think it had a single episode like that. Now, it's funny, now delving into season 5, which is what this video is supposed to be like, I think the most common opinion I've seen on season 5 is that it was great up until episode 6, I believe, and then episodes 7, 8, and 9 were basically filler and boring, and then they came back with a great finale. I personally disagree with that. Although I can see, I think episodes 8 and 9 were my least favorite of the season. And I can see that point of view because they did drag out the storyline of Naomi being trapped alone in the ship and Holden going out and looking for them, and Alex and Bobbie being on the way. They did drag that out really long. Like, they focused more on like Amos and Avasarala and Marco during those, especially 8 and 9, during those episodes, and they sort of dragged it out because because episode 7, I believe, is the one that set up the cliffhanger of Naomi jumping alone on that ship, and I actually expected it to be resolved in episode 8, the next episode, but they stretched it out and waited till the finale to resolve it. So I do understand that those 3 episodes were definitely more stretched out than as compared to earlier in the season, and and I could understand the feeling that the show was kind of spinning its wheels and withholding a lot of stuff for the finale. But ultimately, like, I still love those episodes, particularly episode 7. Like, I'd argue with everyone in episode 7. Episode 7 was actually one of my favorite episodes of the season, probably one of my favorite episodes of the show, even though that was the episode that took place almost entirely on Marco's ship, that dealt almost entirely with Marco and Naomi and Philip. And I thought that was probably some of the best character moments, one of the most emotional, most well acted, like in that ending when Naomi jumps out into space was thrilling. So I disagree wholeheartedly with anyone who says that episode was boring or filler or setup. I actually think that is one of the singular best episodes of the entire show. And that gets into the heart of why I would name season 5 my favorite season of the show, and why I love it so much. And that's because that it's the strongest sort of character piece of the entire show. It dealt more, particularly with our main cast, the Rocinante crew, Holden, Amos, and Naomi, although Alex got shortchanged, but I'll talk about that later. But if it dealt with them and their character stories, and it delved deep into their character stories and made it a lot more emotional, honestly, than I think any other seasons has done. And also, you had other characters like Avasarala and Drummer that this show, and Clarissa, I'll throw out in there too, that the show did an amazing job. Oh, and Marco and Philip of developing these characters and delving into them. And so this is, I think, because you had that mix of, you had the really, I want to say like mind-blowing political story that's reminiscent of like season 1 or 2. And you had like a really apocalyptic event and the asteroids of hitting Earth, which is unlike anything the show's done. Well, I mean, there was a risk of that happening when Eros, but Eros actually didn't hit. Here you had like an actual apocalypse taking place on Earth that was born out of a conspiracy, and so that felt true to like the Expanse's like political aspect of the show, the political thriller aspect of the show that existed throughout its entire run, which is like woven into its bones, and I think is maybe the best example of that, in fact. And on top of that, you had the best character stories of the entire show, in my opinion. The most emotional, the most impactful throughout the season. And unlike what has said some of these naysayers say, and in fact I've heard some people saying that the first 3 episodes of the show moved too slowly, I actually think that this was the best structured and the best paced season as well. Unlike season 3, which I thought was very poorly paced. First half moved too slow, second half moved too fast. This, I think, was actually the perfectly paced season. I mean, the only weak spot, of course, is that episode 8 and 9 where they kind of dragged out the whole Naomi being trapped on the ship storyline. But other than that, like, every episode there was no episode, not even 8 or 9, that felt like filler to me. Every episode had, because 9 dealt with like Amos and Clarissa and that whole dilemma they had with should we save the people, so that was very important. 8 dealt with the David Pastor wanting to destroy Palace and Avasarala having to deal with that, and so there was no unnecessary episode, there was no filler. And also 8 dealt with Drummer's dilemma as well. So, and as for the first 3, like, they all set up beautifully. It was like beautiful setup, which you absolutely needed for that major payoff that you got in episode 4, that lasted for the rest of the season. That the only reason that worked as well as it did was because those first 3 episodes did such a damn good job of setting it up. So I don't think there was a singular weak point. In fact, I would say this is the only season of The Expanse I would say this to. There wasn't a singular weak point of the season. There wasn't a singular unnecessary episode. There wasn't a singular point where I thought the story dragged or they just added in filler to make up time. I felt like everything, like even that stuff you had with Naomi trapped alone in the ship, I know a lot of people complained about that because it seemed to drag out too long. That was amazing character stuff. That showed the kind of shit Naomi was made of, that she was able to endure that kind of stuff, and how much she loved her family, that she was willing to risk her lives to go through this hell. So I think every single moment of the season was poignant, and it was beautifully paced, and it had that mix of that personal weight that no other season had, like in so many characters, because you have other previous seasons had dealt with some personal weight with Holden, or some with Miller, or, some with Avasarala, but here we got like a 10 basically for pretty much every character, for Holden, for Drummer, for Naomi, for Amos, for Avasarala, not so much Alex and Bobbie, but they definitely were shortchanged this season, but so that was a weak part of this season, but still, that was way more than any season previously has done. On top of that, you got the best kind of the intrigue, the most shocking sort of event in the asteroids hitting Earth, and just a dramatic change and the whole social political system. Have you had a massive conspiracy that was beyond anything the show had done previously, and it was due, of course, to the ring gates. And I love how we don't actually, unlike season 4, it doesn't focus on the ring gates, and the ring gates aren't really a factor. Like, we don't go there very often, we don't see beyond the other planets, beyond the ring gates at all. But they are basically what's driving the story of the season. It's the consequences of their existence that cause this major, like, break. And I believe they called the biggest, trying to find the right words. Like, biggest terrorist attack or worst apocalyptic event in human history. Apocalyptic isn't the right word. It's like it's the most death. Of course, human race is a lot more populous in this time frame, so that you have the possibility to have a more deadly event that's more deadly than World War II or the Black Plague, simply because there are more human beings that exist that can die. But basically, yeah, it's the worst event in human history, and it's all because of the ring gates. It's the driving force of why everything was happening, I think. And plus that ending of the season that tied it all together, that explained everything, that Marco is just a pawn being used by a bigger conspiracy. Like, that was perfect. That was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Alright, so now let me get into the various storylines of Season 5. Let me start with James Holden, because I always do. And his was interesting because, I mean, there was a common theme throughout all the different storylines about loss. And with Holden, you had this... he was a fish out of water, basically, because he so used to having his crew there to support him. And here, he was thrust into a different situation where he's dealing with a crisis, and he didn't have his crew there. And also dealt with him, of course, feeling lonely, and especially being apart from Naomi. Like, that was a very sort of strong beginning to the story, where he was, insisting that he would go with Naomi, but she kept rejecting him. And so he had to deal with Fred Johnson, who he never trusted, who they always had a very rough relationship, and then have to deal with his death, to see the man die in front of him, and you start to appreciate him more. And then he had to deal with Fred Johnson's best friend, Bull, as they went off on the mission to destroy the proto-molecule. And eventually that turned into a mission to save Naomi, something that Bull wasn't on board with, and they kind of butt heads about it. And Monica Stewart, who at first was just sort of prying into things that Holden thought she shouldn't, so he saw her more as an annoyance, but she actually became more of an asset and someone who was there to keep him grounded. So that was an interesting dynamic. It was really exciting, particularly the moments where Fred Johnson died and they had the proto-molecule stolen. You had that robotic thingy, and Holden was like shooting at it. Like, that was amazing stuff. And of course, the fact that Rocinante almost blew up. I didn't like Sakai. I thought she was an annoying character. She was the kind... I hope we'd never see this character again every time she appeared on screen, particularly after she shot Fred Johnson, where she was like, "You in us, get out of here." I'm just like, "Oh, get off my screen, I hate you." So maybe that was one negative aspect of this storyline, so I really, really hope we don't see her again, because she's just so annoying. Anyway... overall, I did think this was again an emotionally powerful, and it wasn't like the most important, even though I'm beginning with it. It's not the most important storyline of the season, which is a change. Usually Holden's the focus, but he wasn't so much this season, which I actually thought was great. More of the focus of the season was probably Naomi, who I'll talk about next. Who I thought this was an extremely powerful storyline. I thought that Marco Naras was a really intimidating villain. I thought the actor did an amazing job of playing someone who was narcissistic and maniacal, and that's people like that do exist. and it's interesting seeing his perspective and his crew's perspective of Naomi as someone who's weak, who just runs away from her problems, and someone who abandons them and abandons a kid, which is a warped perspective. and it's so weird because she's surrounded by everyone who has that perspective of her, and yet we as the audience know that she's not like that. She was actually very strong to have to leave her son behind, which is something that she didn't want to do, but she couldn't live with being manipulated and used by Marco. And of course, she was actually a good person and wouldn't participate in genocide. And that dynamic was so good and so well played. And you had the sort of her desire to save Philip, to protect Philip from Marco, to get him to turn away. But of course, basically she didn't stand a chance of turning Philip against Marco because Philip is too encroached, too ingrained in Marco's Kool-Aid, so to speak, too under Marco's control, because Marco was the one who raised him. He has years and years and years of conditioning of being a soldier, and I do love that Naomi almost won him over. That he did have this desire for a mother that was there and that was strong, and that I wouldn't say exploited that, but she used that to try to get him to see the error of his ways, to get him to see that Marco was a manipulative and abusive father who was just using him for his own purposes. But she almost was there, but Marco, of course, is a master manipulator and did manage to manipulate Philip, and of course, as I said, firmly had him under his control. And when he saw that control was slipping, he knew exactly what to do, what to say to regain control. And he convinced Philip to actively try to murder Naomi's family, her lover and her best friends, people she considered her family. And he actively got Philip to completely turn his back on Naomi, and to the point of slapping her when she tried to convince him not to hurt her. And then when Naomi, quote unquote, committed suicide, Marco could see that Philip was slipping again, but Marco, of course, used the fact that she was still alive as a way to manipulate him even further. That, oh, look, she just abandoned you again. She doesn't care about you. And we end the season with Philip being completely 100% under Marco's thumb. Which it's tragic. It's a very tragic story, but it's also really dynamic, as well as you had characters like Sin, who did really care for Naomi, and in fact, Naomi almost got him to turn on Marco, but he literally turned his back on Naomi because he thought that there was nothing he could do to protect her from Marco. And then when Naomi tried to kill herself, he tried to save her, but that ended up in his own death because she wasn't actually killing herself. She was desperately trying to save her friends. And that was also extremely powerful and extremely tragic. And of course, as I mentioned, Naomi's whole venture on the Czechoslovakia of putting herself through some of the worst hell imaginable, her body through the worst strain possible, and the vague glimmers of hopes to save her friends, to save them from the destruction that was coming. And she went as far as to doing something, jumping out of the ship, which most likely, and she was probably convinced herself, would result in her death. But she did it as a last-ditch effort to save her friends. And that speaks really highly to her. And it's also great that it was actually Alex and not Holden, because if it was Holden, you can say it was her lover, that she would sacrifice herself. But it shows how much she cares about the whole family of the Rosnate, that she would equally be willing to give her life to save Alex just as much as she would Holden. And that was touching. So I think it was by far Naomi's best season. This is something the actress Dominic Tipper said. She thought that season 5 was by far the best season from her perspective, because she looks at it from Naomi's standpoint. I definitely see that that's firmly the case, that this is by far the best use of Naomi. And Dominic Tipper and a lot of people are saying this, gave an amazing performance. It was an absolutely amazing performance. And of course, the award shows are bullshit, and they never recognize the Expanse, and they never will, just because it's not popular enough. And the award shows are popularity contests, or who can pay them off. So it's all bullshit. I don't give a fuck about them. But if it actually did have any merit to them, she would fucking win Best Actress. Not supporting, Best Actress. But of course, there's no merit to that bullshit. So I'm not worried about it. Anyway, so then there's Amos and his storyline, and I gotta be honest, this was probably my least favorite storyline of the season. Not to say I didn't like it. I did, of course, like it, because Amos is a very interesting character, and I think this storyline in particular gets into the heart of his character. It is interesting seeing the effect it has on him being separated from the Rocinante crew, because part of the core of Amos's character is that he uses people like Holden and Naomi as his moral compass, because he knows he has none, but he knows he has none. Yeah, I mean, he must have enough of moral compass to be aware that he needs to follow people with a strong moral compass, because he's aware that he has none, and he kind of wants that, because most people are criminals or sociopaths or whatever you want to call them, like him, wouldn't give a fuck that they didn't have a moral compass. They would be happy with not having a moral compass, and they wouldn't attempt to get one. But Amos at least cares enough to attempt. He knows enough to follow people who do have a strong sense of morality, and that shows through his storyline this season, that he doesn't, where he's alone. Yeah, he still cares enough to do what's right by Lydia. At the start, he meets Lydia's husband, whom she married after Amos knew her, so she never knew him. He just knew of him from, or at least the husband, Charles, knew of Amos from Lydia. And he still feels the need to protect him and stand up for him, just for Lydia's sake, to honor Lydia, and because he knew that's what Lydia would want, which does show a strength of character, and that he's willing to go see his old friend Eric, who's a huge gangster now, and has managed to work it out. And Eric, of course, is worried that Amos has returned to take over his territory, and it feels threatened by him, but Amos slowly convinces him that he's just there to help Charles, to help Lydia. So that was pretty touching, but then it gets into the storyline with Clarissa, and I do think that this was, again, handled better in the show than it was in the books. I think you got the stronger sense that Amos wanted to reach out and help Clarissa in the same way that Naomi and Holden helped him. That he wanted to, because he saw that she was someone who had committed a lot of crimes and done a lot of stuff that she deeply regrets, and she feels she needs to pay for the rest of her life, which is something he can relate to. And yet he was saved by Naomi and Holden, so he feels in the same way. Maybe that's, he could do the same thing for her, but of course in this situation, whether she's in prison, she's like, what can you do for me? You can't do anything for me. But oddly, the big apocalyptic event with the asteroids hitting Earth actually was a good thing for them, because it did allow Amos to save Clarissa, and how he was willing to risk his life, first of all with the guards, where he was so insistent that he wasn't leaving without her. And so they had that struggle to make it out of the prison. But once they were out, there was these UN rescue camps. And if Amos wanted to leave the planet, and this is a very important point, Amos wanted to leave the planet and go to Luna and be reunited with his family eventually, he could just go. He could just walk up to the camp and be like, okay, I'm a refugee, take me up to Luna. But, Avasarala would probably put in a word for him and give him passage or whatever. Not that everyone would be able to just evacuate the planet like that, but he could. But Clarissa couldn't. She was a fugitive, basically, officially. There was, the world was in so much chaos, there probably wasn't anyone out looking for them, and they probably don't even care. They probably would just mark her off as dead and not give a shit. But if they found her, if she walked up into the camp, they'd be like, hey, you're a prisoner, you're under arrest. And so Amos went through this wild, crazy adventure through this apocalyptic landscape for Clarissa. He did it for her, basically, because, again, he had this strong desire to save her. And then you had the ironic push where Clarissa started to become the guiding sense of morality for Amos in the same way that Holden was. Because she kept trying to tell him what the right thing to do was. And she saw good in people. Which I thought was a really great dynamic, and I think that helped the Amos and Clarissa relationship, and that made Amos appreciate Clarissa a lot more, not as someone who is just there to be pitied, or someone that he feels sympathy with because he went through with something similar, but also he sees quality within her. He sees a worth within her for that. And I love the line because they encountered that crazy guy with the gun and he tried to shoot Amos, but Clarissa saved him. But Clarissa was, when they were pondering over it, she asked him, she's like, if he hadn't been an asshole who tried to kill us, if he was just a nice guy, would we have still killed him and stole his stuff in order to survive? And Amos said, shit, I need to get back to my crew. And again, I love that so much because that gets to, he's starting to realize that he's reverting to not having any sense of morality because he was away from Holden and Naomi for too long. And that was really powerful stuff. And of course, his whole thing had a huge theme in this story about tribalism, of course, which relates to the Belta stories a bit as well, about how he felt like he was just in emergency situations like this, or the churn as he refers to it, everyone gets tribal and the tribes get smaller, and at the moment it was just a tribe of him and Clarissa, tribe of two. But she saw it differently, and she saw that, and I love her talk with Eric later on, where she talked about there was worth in expanding the tribe, where they went to Eric and asked for help in getting to a ship, where Clarissa knew there was a ship up in Rhode Island that they needed to get to. And she convinced Eric to do it. Like, Amos wouldn't be convince Eric. He's just like, are you going to do it or not? But Clarissa had to, because he was still holding on to this empire, and she had to get him to realize that what he had is gone, and he needs to start a new life. And once they were there was all these workers there who were trapped there, and Clarissa was the one who was totally insistent that they take him with them. Eric, of course, was totally against it, but Amos ultimately stuck up for Clarissa, and part of it, you could say, is because Clarissa said, if they're not coming, I'm not coming, and they needed Clarissa to help repair the ship. But I think more to the point is that Amos saw the same sort of quality in Clarissa that he saw in Holden and Naomi, that he knew this was the moral compass, the right thing to do, and that he should just throw his instincts aside and follow her inkling in this case. Now, these sort of the battle scene of them trying to leave Earth with those security guys attacking them, it was a well done action sequence from a technical standpoint. It was great stunts. It was the filming, cinematography was great. Everyone was talking about that one shot, which was pretty good. Maybe myself, I wasn't as blown away by it, but it was good. But story-wise, it didn't quite work for me, because it did seem kind of tacked on and out of nowhere and just there. I mean, you could say, sure, it makes sense because bullies would arise in situations like this and they would just try to attack them and take their resources. But it seemed weird to me that they came off as kind of like amateurish at first, and then all of a sudden there was this huge force to be reckoned with, and they almost killed them all in front of it. Not to mention the fact that because Clarissa spared them the first time, that actually resulted in more deaths from Eric's people. So it seems like Clarissa was totally wrong to spare them that time. So from a story standpoint, I don't think it quite worked for me. It was, as I said, it was a great action sequence. It was enthralling. It was thrilling. I loved it. It was shot beautifully and performed beautifully. As far as like special effects and stunts go and everything like that. But story wise, I thought it was kind of unnecessary, honestly. But and then of course you had Amos, once he got out to Luna, refused to go with Eric because he knew that he's not that person anymore, and Eric is free to go to another colony and set up become a big gangster there, and he's really thrilled about that. So it's good things work out for him. But Amos has moved on. He's not that person anymore. But then, of course, he gets Clarissa to come aboard the Rosnate because he knows that she needs a place. She needs a home. She needs a place to go. And she knew that was going to be a rough sell to Holden because she actively tried to kill Holden. She tried to blame him. She murdered a whole ship of people and tried to pin it on Holden to disgrace him and then try to kill him. And so that's a hard thing to get over. So Amos, his whole thing is like, oh, you remember that time you tried to kill me, but we're good friends now. And Holden's like, yeah, we're family. It's like, good, thanks for being cool about this, and just calls Claire. That was such a great moment. It's one of the funniest moments of the entire show, and just Holden just like shocked when Clarissa comes on board. But I do like how Holden didn't put up too much of a fight. Like, he was shocked. He probably wasn't completely okay with it, but he trusted Amos. He knew that Amos was a family member, and he saw that Amos wanted it, so he was willing to go with it. Which is, in the books, he put up more of a fuss, and I actually like the way it was handled here a lot better. That the fact that he didn't put up such a fuss. Now, maybe I might be proven wrong. Maybe he'll put up a bit of a fuss in season 6, but in this scene, at least, he seemed willing to just go with Amos, which I did really appreciate. And then you had Alex and Bobbie's storyline, which, yeah, I gotta be honest, I did think this was handled better in the books. There was a certain storyline in the books of Bobbie and Alex saving the Prime Minister of Mars's life because Marco and his people tried to kill him, tried to assassinate him, and so they had to do. There was this whole storyline about that, and the show got rid of it. And I mean, I'd be okay with the show getting rid of that if they replaced it with something better, but they didn't really. See, I was actually looking forward to Bobbie and Alex's storyline this season because I thought it was going to be this huge, like, espionage investigation kind of thing, similar to what Bobbie had in season 2, but where they were investigating this conspiracy in the Martian military. And that's how it started in the first couple episodes when Alex met Admiral Silverterre, and Bobbie had her whole murder board with all the different holograms of all the people she thinks would be involved with the conspiracy. But I can't remember exactly which episode it was. Maybe it was episode 4. I think they left to go to the Razorback. And for the rest of the season, it was just them and the Razorback. And they would just go to them like for a couple minutes every episode or so, and just so they could have a banter and so they can talk about what's going on. But they were basically just sitting in the Razorback for the rest of the season, and just like having banter, just exposition. And so it was a very poor use of them, in my opinion. Now, you did get that one action scene where Marco's people tried to destroy them, and Bobbie just went out and blazed them all, and Alex like planted a bomb on their ship. Like, that was great. That was a good scene. I did really appreciate that, but it wasn't enough. Like, we needed more than just one good action sequence to fulfill their storyline for that second half of the season. As still the majority of the storyline for the second half of the season, they were just like the comic relief or the exposition, just sitting around in the Razorback. And you did have the scene with them at the end where they went and saved Bobbie, where they went and saved Naomi. But I think that could have been better paid off if they had more to do before they got there, honestly. I did think it was great that Alex was being stubborn, and Naomi purposely put the ship in the spin to prevent Alex from docking, but he was still trying to find a way. That was interesting that he was so determined to save Naomi's life, and Naomi was so determined to save his life. Because they didn't realize that it was a trap, and it was great that Bobbie was kind of his objective eye there, though. That Alex was too emotionally close to it, and she saw that Naomi had jumped out of the ship. Bobbie was the one who spotted that. And when they realized it was too dangerous to get close to dock, Bobbie risked her life, went out in the spacesuit to save Naomi's. And that was touching. I gotta say, like I mentioned this in my review of episode 10, the scene where it was beautifully shot, the music was beautiful, the acting was beautiful, when Naomi was like, and I love how it was just from Naomi's perspective, you couldn't see what was going on, where she thought she was going to die, but then you slowly hear Bobbie approach her, and you vaguely hear Bobbie's talking and pumping her full of oxygen, and all from Naomi's perspective. And as I mentioned, this scene made me cry, and there's actually very few scenes in film and television, especially in The Expanse. I think Home was the only time I cried previously to this. That scene made me cry. It was just so beautiful. But then you get into Bobbie saying, "Okay, Alex, bring us in. Alex." And then you go back to the Razorback, and Alex is stroked out. Now, the showrunners, everyone involved with the show, will try to insist that this works for the story. And they try to imply that they had planned this all along, but objectively, that's not true. Like, apparently there's footage that shows Alex being there at the ending party at the UN in the final episode. So it was obvious that this was actually reshoots done after the controversy with Cass Anvar, when they were kicking Cass Anvar off the show. Now, I don't at all, one thing I want to make clear, if you haven't seen any of my other videos before, I don't at all disagree with firing Cass Anvar. I think absolutely, I 100% understand that. The show, the Alcon or whatever did an investigation, and they have to do what they think is right. What I do disagree with, however, is them killing off Alex. I think you can recast Alex. I know, and there's a lot of people who are very strongly against this. When I did my live discussions, there were so many people in the chat going like, no recast, no! But, and I value your opinion. I mean, that's valid, because I definitely understand the argument against a recast, because it would be hard to accept a different actor in that role. Every time you see that actor, you'd be like, that's not Alex. And believe me, there's other examples of that in recasts. A lot of people, and I think unfairly, were comparing it to Arjun recast. And Arjun, of course, is Avasarala's husband, who has appeared in season 1 and 2 as a different actor, and they recast a different actor in season 4 where he had a more prominent role. And a lot of people, including myself, thought that was a horrible recast, that the actor who played them was not fit for that role. He brought a too different dynamic to that character, and he was too suave and I didn't like him at all. But I think it's unfair to compare that to Alex, because frankly, just do a better job at recasting. It can be done. Like, I think Dario in Game of Thrones, I actually think that was a great recast. So they put more thought and energy to, and a lot of people have suggested specific actors who would fulfill the role of Alex really well. And then when I look at it, I was like, yeah, they would actually do a great job as Alex. And I'm talking about realistic actors, not like film stars. Of course, you're not going to get a film star to play Alex on The Expanse, but like other TV actors and character actors. And there's plenty that would have filled the role perfectly. That they could have, even if they can't get them, I'm sure they could find an unknown who would actually fit that role very well. And the reason why is because, first of all, we don't have Alex around anymore, which sucks because he was a great character. And he's in the books for the next couple books, so they're gonna have to change things by not having him around. But more to the point, you could tell in that episode that the death of such an important character who'd been around for so long, who was such an important part of the show, after being shortchanged all season, not having that much to do, his death seems like an afterthought. Now, granted, they did try to say that the whole stroking out is true to The Expanse. I've heard that in all these articles. Oh, it's so true. They set up the possibility of people dying from the stroke since day one, which is true. In fact, this is how Fred Johnson died in the books. But for me, that was well earned in the books because you could tell that was a part of the story and it made sense, even though it did, in that case, seem to come out of nowhere because there was no foreshadowing that Fred Johnson was going to stroke out. But when it happened, it felt natural. And the way they dealt with it felt like it justified the death. And it did feel like it and as I said, the risk of stroking out was always earned. Now, if I take away my knowledge of Cass Anvar and the actor and the controversy, if I had no knowledge of that and knew nothing about it, I'm 100% certain about this, that I would still be able to tell that this was an afterthought, that this was just thrown in at the last second. There's examples of other shows where I didn't know anything about the actor's situation, and they killed off a character, seemed really sudden out of nowhere, and I instantly recognized, hey, this seems thrown in. And it's the same case here, because you had the emotional storyline with Drummer and Naomi in that final episode, and it's already emotional enough with that, and the whole thing with Alex seems like an afterthought. It seems like it's unable to give it the proper weight that this character deserves because there was already so much emotional weight to the episode, and that's because it is, frankly, an afterthought. That's because this wasn't the original intention. That's because originally Alex is supposed to survive, but they did reshoots and changed it, and it definitely seems that. Now, they did do their damnedest to try to fit it into the story. Did get great lines, like Amos telling Naomi that he died trying to save his family and that's the way he'd want to go, which was a touching line. I did appreciate that. And you had Holden touching the plaque and showing how much he missed Alex. And you had Bobbie Draper, Avasarala at the party telling Bobbie Draper that she was sorry for her loss. And so they tried their best, but I think and plus that scene where Avasarala says to Rosinante crew, you're exactly what Marco hates. I think that scene would have worked much better with Alex there because that's the whole point, that you got Martian Earthers and Belters, and of course she used Bobbie as an example of Martian, but she was never a part of the Rosinante crew. Now, she could be implying Alex, of course, who had passed away at this point, but still, I just get the strong sense at all that you could tell this was a last minute thing, that even though they set up for the possibility of strokes in the show, it did seem like they used that as an excuse to write off the character, especially how he died after they did this high maneuvers to get the ship in close to save Naomi, and he just died a couple minutes later. It did seem very poorly paced, so I do think this is one of the worst aspects of the season, to be honest, and that they should have just recast him. I will stand by that, even though, of course, I gotta accept it and move on. They didn't recast, they killed off Alex. Alex is gone, so I'm gonna move beyond this. In season 6, I'm not gonna be like, oh, this would be so much better if Alex were here. I'm gonna accept it and move on. But I still think they made a huge mistake. I still think there should have been a recast. Honest, and as I said, I understand the arguments against the recast, but I honestly think it's the lesser of two evils. I think this is the worst of two evils. I think this was a bad decision. I think you can tell that it's thrown in. I mean, I actually think it would have been better if they decided to kill off Alex between seasons, or maybe just say he went back to Mars to be with his family. That would have been better than this. I think this actively interferes with this great episode that they had in the finale. But that is just me. So, anyway, there's Drummer's storyline, which I was very skeptical about to begin with, because they were giving her the storyline of a different book character, Michopa. And ironically, they gave Drummer's storyline in the books to Bulb, and they gave her a different story. Now Michopa's storyline actually doesn't come into play until book 6, and that, and also the fact that Drummer is Drummer, and she has a past experience with Marco and a past experience with Naomi, makes her very different. And so the storyline was in fact very different. The main thing that was similar to the book storyline was the fact that of the polyamorous group, and they gave that to Drummer. And of course, at first I had an issue with that, because there's only about a year's difference between season 4 and season 5, and so we're led to believe that she has this close-knit family that she's in love with, that it just happened in one season. Plus, they have all these ships. Also, her being a pirate, that's something that I couldn't buy. That was a hard sell for me, that she was actually stealing from colony ships going through the ring gates. That seemed really out of character for her. But and then like in the middle of the season, her storyline was mostly boring. And like whenever we went to it, I'm like, oh, it's this storyline again. But her storyline got exceptionally good towards the end of the season, and then it started to justify all the earlier scenes that we got that I originally thought was boring. You actually needed those scenes in order to establish, because as I said, like it was a hard sell that she had this polyamorous family after only 1 year. So you needed those scenes in order to establish that, in order to sell that, and I think they actually did. Because it had a couple really strong dilemmas, and it's a really strong character story for Drummer this year. And I think Kara G did some amazing acting, amazing performances this year. And she was, in fact, 8 months pregnant when they filmed this. And so they did a lot to hide it. And her performances were absolutely amazing, because first of all, they had the dilemma of Marco Inaros asking Drummer and her group to join them, because she has a pretty sizable, well-known group. But it was kind of, and it is kind of reminiscent that they had this protection racket scene earlier with Amos, because it was basically that. It was basically a protection racket. It was basically, oh, join us, and we'll have all this protection. But really, and a member of Drummer's group spells this out, is basically they're fooling themselves thinking that they have any choice. The only choices are to join Marco or die. And he does this whole crew member exchange thing, and under the guise of, oh, we're all one happy fleet, so we can exchange crew members. That's what fleets do. But really, it's his way of, by having Drummer's man go on board Marco's ship, as a way of holding him hostage in case anything goes wrong. He has a hostage he can use against her, which is exactly what he does. And having sending Marco's person, Caral, on Drummer's ship is a way to keep an eye on Drummer and make sure she doesn't step out of line. So it was a very precarious situation, and Drummer, very reluctantly went along with it for the good of her family. And of course, she was most closest to a woman, Oksana, who was really suggesting that she needs to do this. And at every turn, Oksana was the one who convinced Drummer that she needs to do this for the good of the family, that she cares about her family, she loves her family, then she'll do this and she'll follow Marco. But things get more and more hairy when Marco asks them to destroy the Rosinante, and of course when Drummer finds out that Naomi is in fact alive, and that by them destroying the Rosinante they were helping assist in Naomi's death. And that is something that she can't abide, and there are several times where she almost pulled a gun on Corral, and Oksana had to step in and stop her from doing so. But then, when it came down to the fight, Drummer just found that she just couldn't do it. She didn't have her in her, and that she would rather... she couldn't live with herself by destroying the Rosinante and helping kill Naomi, and that she would rather risk her family and what they have than live a life in servitude, and as a direct result of their betrayal, and they did of course kill Corral, which I hated that character. It was so great to see her go. And they did save the Rosinante, which was also an awesome moment. This amazing fight scene. But it came at a cost, as their loved ones, who was with Marco, of course, was killed. And Marco killed him in the most brutal fashion. He seemed to gloat over doing it, which is going to create a very interesting dynamic. I mean, because Drummer already hated Marco for killing Ashford and Fred Johnson. Now, she's gonna really have it out for him in the future. But of course, it also broke up this family because there were 6. One died, and Oksana and another guy left. And of course, Oksana was the biggest blow to Drummer because she was the one she was closest to. But Oksana felt betrayed, utterly betrayed, and blamed Drummer for not caring about them. And I think she was putting it incorrectly, because she kind of put in terms as Drummer cares more about Naomi than she does about their family, which is the wrong way of looking at it. It's more of that Drummer cares more about being free and doing the right thing and not living under someone's thumb. Because either way, either choice she had to sacrifice someone. If she chose to follow Marco, she would have to sacrifice Naomi. And if she chose to rebel from Marco, she would have to sacrifice Serge. And Oksana incorrectly looked at it as a choice between, she chose Naomi over Serge, when that wasn't the case. She actually chose freedom, doing the right thing, and not working for a psychopath over being a life of servitude. And that's something that Oksana couldn't see, and that I guess that blonde-haired dude couldn't see that either, because he's the one that suggested working for Marco in the first place. But Michio and other dude, his name is escaping me, they totally saw things from Drummer's perspective. So now Drummer's group is only 3, and they only have 2 ships. So it's very interesting to see how that will affect things going forward in season 6. But overall, that was an amazing storyline. I thought the payoff was huge. I thought it was very emotionally powerful, and it almost brought me to tears when they were watching Serge die. It was a really powerful scene, and of course it was very satisfying when they killed Corral. So I actually ultimately, even though I was really skeptical about Drummer's storyline at first, I ultimately loved it, and I thought it was a huge success. Then there's Avasarala, who's very interesting storyline this year, because last year a lot of people were unhappy with her because she was showing sort of her darker side, and this year she was kind of facing the consequences from that. Her husband wouldn't talk to her, and of course that becomes even more tragic when he ends up dying in the asteroid attack, so they never got to reconcile. She was mostly ostracized by the government. She was just sanctioned as Nancy Gal thought it was ironic to put her in charge of all the colony's ships leaving to go to the ring gates, since Avasarala was opposed to letting colony ships go to the ring gates. But she wasn't really listened to, and she was kind of sanctioned. And to be honest, I did find something a bit unrealistic about this, because when they had Avasarala on his conference call with Gal, but when Avasarala spoke up, she's like, "Oh, well, you just shut up, you don't have your." And then why is she on the call? Like, why is she even humor her by? I mean, and also I think, like, because Avasarala and Delgado knew of Marco's attack, they figured it out. They were warning that Marco might attack, and they were no one would listen to them. And when they tried to tell them to get their defenses ready, they were all ostracized and treated like they're insane. And in fact, Avasarala, when she had hard evidence that Marco was throwing rocks at Earth, she had to get a cook to slip in a hand terminal into Nancy Gal's meeting in order to talk to her. And even after she did, the chief of staff was like, "Oh my fucking God, how did she get in here?" I gotta be honest, I think that was kind of done just to raise tension, to raise the stakes. I don't really buy that's how they would treat her. After all she's done, and plus, like, if she had evidence like that, I don't think they would just ostracize her like that and not even let her talk. I think that was I don't know. To me, you may say, looking at modern day politics, oh yeah, obviously, but I'm not talking about modern day politics. I'm talking about politics as it's been portrayed in The Expanse, and I don't think that I didn't really buy it. I think they just kind of raised the stakes. But of course, she ended up being right, and she ended up saving Earth from an asteroid attack. They managed to destroy one of the asteroids that was going to hit Earth because of her, and she was recognized because of this. But Gal, and of course, and most of her staff died, and so they had to look for the next person in charge, which ended up being a transportation minister who did see the worth in Avasarala because she was a hero, and Delgado. They were both heroes for protecting her from the asteroid, and he asked her to be part of his administration. So it seemed like he was going to be intelligent and lean on her vast experience, but instead he went the route of wanting revenge. And so he listened to Delgado because Delgado was telling him what he wanted to hear about just attacking Belter stations and just killing thousands of Belters regardless of whether or not they were innocent civilians or not, which is something that Avasarala couldn't abide. And when they went behind her back and did it, she's like, okay, she was pissed. She's like, okay, what we should do now is try to find a way to excuse this as a one-off attack. But of course, David Patcher had he had no plans to do with that whatsoever. He wanted to expand attacks and attack even larger populous areas like Ceres, which Avasarala could not abide at all. So she resigned, and this led to a lot of the other cabinet to resign as well. And so they were all outraged at Pastor, and they outnumbered him. And they ended up doing a vote of no confidence to remove him, and then they put Avasarala in charge instead. Now, Avasarala said, oh, she was very humble. She was like, oh, they just did it because I have name recognition, which I think she's wrong. I think they did it because they saw again and again that she's an effective leader, that she knows what she's doing, that she knows the right path in order to fight Marco, and it's not by just going over and killing a lot of Belter civilians. It's the wrong way to go. And that she is the most experienced and probably the best person there that could possibly lead them in this current crisis. That's why they chose her. And then you had that really touching ending, which I really liked, with Avasarala at the sort of the gathering where she meets the Rocinante crew and like pronounces to everyone, and Bobbie Draper is now her new liaison, and it pronounces to everyone that the Rocinante crew represents exactly what Marco hates, and that's how they defeat him, and that's why Marco kept trying to kill them, is because the best way is to unite the Belt Earthers and Martians. And that was a touching scene. So overall, like, I wouldn't say Avasarala's storyline was my favorite. As I said, some of the things at the beginning, I thought it was a bit unrealistic. But of course, the asteroid attacks were like, oh my god. Those are so fucking intense. I can't even understate that. So that was great. So overall, yeah, I think she had a really strong storyline this year. Definitely better than last year's. And with a lot of emotional highs and lows. So it was great stuff. And in fact, this is kind of, and I commented it on some of my episode reviews, that Avasarala this year was kind of going back to the kick-ass awesome Avasarala season 2 that we all missed. Instead of the mean, bitchy one in season 4, she was the sort of kick-ass, do the right thing, fuck anyone who disagrees with her. And it was awesome. And I liked it. I think at the end, it looks good, I would say. It looks good for the system that she's now in charge of the UN again. Yeah, and then I guess I could talk a bit about the Martian traders and the whole dynamic they had with Marco and Naris, because this is something I was sort of waiting to see, and I wish they did get into more detail about this throughout the season, because Bobbie, as I mentioned, Bobbie and Alex were investigating the Martians and this whole conspiracy to sell weapons to the Belters, but it ended up being much bigger than that. It ended up being a huge fraction of their military that splintered off and wanted to form their own civilization on one of the worlds beyond the ring gates, and they chose it specifically because there was alien technology, alien shipyards, and they wanted to use the protomolecule in order to play with the protomolecule alien technology and build a civilization based on it. And we also see how the more strict and more authoritarian version of Mars, which will become even more stern, strict, and authoritarian in the future, as we saw that they're talking about putting a bullet in the heads of anyone for even really minor infractions. So it's going to be a authoritarian dictatorship. And they have they're playing with the strongest technology possible. So one might say that they gave Marco all the means, the Martian ships, the weapons, and probably a lot of tactical advice as well, in order to wreak havoc on the system, to bring Earth to its knees. And of course, by them leaving, they're sort of severely weakening Mars as well. And of course, there was an attack on the Martian Parliament, which is something I just mentioned in passing, but it's another thing Marco pulled off. So they severely weakened Earth, they severely weakened Mars. And they basically, even though they're still in the minority and they still don't have as much firepower as the Inners do, they are basically controlling the belt at the moment. And they're definitely, Avasarala and everyone underestimated Marco because they thought he could never take the ring gate, but he takes it very easily at the end of the season. And that's because of the help they had with the Martian Splinter Group. Now, you might say that Marco paid for them for this help with the protomolecule, but I don't think that's exactly accurate, because if all the Martians wanted was the protomolecule and Kotazar, they probably could get them themselves. Now, granted, it's probably easier for Marco to do it because it's in the belt, and they were both controlled by OPA, which Marco is more familiar with, and he would have infiltrators, and he could probably pull it off better. But I think if these Martians put their mind to it, they probably could have done it themselves. If they didn't want Marco, they didn't, and they wouldn't have to give him all the ships, they wouldn't have to give him all this technology and go out of it, which is probably a huge deal for them to do this for him, obviously, and to help him so much. So I don't think it was worth it. They probably could have just put all that effort into getting the protomolecule themselves if they wanted to. But that's not why they helped Marco. It wasn't just to gain a protomolecule, it was also to create chaos. They wanted Earth devastated by asteroid attacks. They wanted Mars, like the Parliament attack. They wanted the whole system in disarray. That way, it made their escape to set up Laconia easier, and it also made it less likely that they would be pursued. Because as they mentioned, they put up all these mines at the other side of the ring gate so no one would pursue them. But at the moment, the whole solar system's in chaos. So it's very unlikely that anyone, even without the mines, would pursue them. So that was the point. So basically everything that happens in the season with Marco wreaking havoc on the system was all the doing of Admiral Duarte, who is the leader of these Martian splinter groups, who now, henceforth, will refer to themselves as Laconians. And it was so they could start their empires, so they could gain independent control of this vital world and the means to play with this technology, the protomolecule, and not be bothered. Because Marco says that you have your system, I have my system. And I don't think they care if Marco wins or loses, or if all of humanity is wiped out because of what they're doing. They don't give a fuck about that. Because they have their system, they have their empire, and that's all they care about. And it was all possible because of all the chaos that Marco wrote. So they basically created him. And Marco definitely is smart and suave and resourceful and convincing and charming as Marco is. He would never have been able to do this without their full support. Like, even if he just bought Martian ships and technology from them, he still wouldn't have been able to do this. He needed their full support to pull this off. And that was fascinating, and I absolutely loved the ending that explored this. It was such a great way. It was such an awesome way to end the season. And of course, earlier in the season, Holden warned about how he feels like he can feel the presence of these hostile aliens every time he goes through the ring gate. And Johnson's like, dismisses it as if it's nothing. But then in the last scene of the season, we see one of these Martian ships or Laconian ships go through the gate and get devoured by something that looked very similar to the anomaly that LV went into that indicated the aliens that killed the protomolecule creators. Very ominous. And absolutely brilliant way to end the season. So my rating for season 5 of The Expanse as a whole is a 10, the best. I do think this is the best season of The Expanse. I mean, it's tied with season 2, so maybe I might go back and forth with it. But regardless, it is, to me, a prime example of the best The Expanse has to offer. I'm actually quite surprised that more people don't see it this way. I thought the acting, the performances, the music, the whole structure, the writing, the pacing, the special effects, everything was on point. I mean, sure, I have my complaints, like the whole Alex's death thing, which was utterly ridiculous. And the fact that they did overall shortchange Alex and Bobbie this season, it was still what they did right, they just did so right. And I just thought that, I thought Marco Naharis was an amazing villain. I think he's probably one of my favorite villains in fiction now because of that. I thought the actor did an amazing job. And, of course, a lot of amazing acting. Dominic Tipper, Kara G. Stephen Strait, I think, was nothing. And the whole Clarissa and Amos thing is also amazing. Just amazing all around. So, absolutely brilliant season. It's funny because, see, book 5 is a lot of people's favorite books, but it's not my favorite book. As I said, my favorite book was book 3. In fact, I honestly thought that book 5 was kind of boring. I thought that it went too long on, like, this personal, like, Holden or Alex's and Amos's, like, personal stories before it got to the meat of the story. And I actually feel like the show really improved upon it. I think it took the best aspects of that book and made it even better. So I actually like it even better than the book it's based off of. And I'd say the same thing about Season 4, but Season 4, as I said, they were working with weak source material. Here, they were working with source material much stronger. So overall, I have to say that the producers, the writing staff, everyone involved with the show got better at their craft. Like, every year, I think they got better. I mean, Season 3 is an exception because they probably kind of fouled up the pacing there. But other than that, like, they keep improving and they keep getting better, and I absolutely positively cannot wait for Season 6. Absolutely. Anyway, that is it for my review of The Expanse Season 5. Thanks so much for watching this. If you are watching this video the day that it's released, you should check out a live discussion video I shall be doing with all the special guests I've been having all during my Season 5 coverage. Darren from D's Review, Don Willie, and Alyssa. We will all join together to talk about Season 5 as a whole, which will be Thursday night, Thursday the February 11th, I believe, which for me is like tonight, later on. But I'll put the link to that discussion in the description below, if you say you can join us live. However, if you're watching this in the archives, you can still check out the link and watch our discussion in the archives. So yeah, be sure to join us for that, and be sure to check out my channel, as I have many more Expanse videos. I shall be doing a book to show comparison video for every episode of Season 5, as well as covering many other shows like Star Trek, Breaking Bad, The Outer Limits, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.